This morning we're continuing on in our series in Daniel. We got a pretty big chunk of text to go through, 1 to 23. So I hope you guys don't have anything on your schedule until about 2 o'clock because we're going to be here for Just kidding. But we do have a good chunk to go through, and it's a good, interesting story, so let's dive in together. It reads, "In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled, and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, 'I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means.' Then the astrologers answered the king, 'May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it.' The king replied to the astrologers, 'This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me.' Once more they replied, 'Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will interpret it.' Then the king answered, 'I am certain that you are trying to gain time, because you realize this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me.' The astrologers answered the king, 'There is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among the humans.' This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, 'Why did the king issue such a harsh decree?' Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, 'Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king.' This is the word of the Lord."
Thanks be to God.
So I don't know how many of you have heard of the TV show How I Met Your Mother. It's a sitcom that aired in the early 2000s, and it became very popular as it chronicled the story of how the main character, Ted, met his children's mother. The basic premise is that in the future, the year 2030, Ted is talking to his teenage kids and recounting the years-long story of the journey that he took to get to the point that he met their mother. One of the things that I found quite interesting about that show is that Ted frequently references the universe. He'll say things like, "The universe has a plan, kids, and that plan is always in motion." Or this is another quote, "Maybe it's dumb to look for signs from the universe. Maybe the universe has better things to do." And I find these kinds of lines ironic because the writers of the show have placed the universe in the role of God. They acknowledge that there is a higher power at work. But instead of giving credit to God, they attribute it to the more esoteric universe. So what we see in the dialogue from How I Met Your Mother is a fundamental misunderstanding of the things of God and how he truly works in the world and in the lives of individuals. And what we see in our passage today is that Nebuchadnezzar, the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, astrologers, Chaldeans, they had a fundamental misunderstanding of the things of God and how he truly works in the world and in the lives of individuals. Right? They didn't understand that it was God who had given Nebuchadnezzar the dream. And they didn't understand that only God could reveal the mystery of what the dream was and what it meant. So while this passage might seem like an interesting story that's rather irrelevant to us today, it actually teaches us some important lessons about how we are to go about making sure that we are not ignorant of the things of God the way that Nebuchadnezzar and his cronies were. Specifically, we can see that this passage teaches that to make sure we have a deeply rooted knowledge of the things of God, we need to first of all understand just how present and active he truly is. We need to live a life that is bathed in prayer. And we need to ultimately place our trust in him, relying on him for all things. So let's take a deeper look at this passage. Let's consider each one of these individually. So as we start this passage, in verse 1, we are immediately confronted with a seeming inconsistency in the text. Remember, I told you at the beginning of this series, there's a lot of places in Daniel people point to and say, that's not right, that's not accurate, that's an inconsistency. See, the Bible's a bunch of made-up hooey. And I said I'm going to try my best to explain those as we come to them. So in chapter 2, verse 1, we have one. It says that these events in this chapter happened in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. But in the first chapter, we learned that Daniel was brought to Babylon in Nebuchadnezzar's first year. And then he underwent 3 years of training to serve in the king's court. So how was Daniel already included among the wise men who were condemned here in chapter 2 if he'd only been in Babylon for a year? Wouldn't that mean that these events had to take place in about the 4th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign? He got there the first year and then 3 years of training. This should be the 4th year, not the 2nd year. Did the Bible get the dating wrong? Is Daniel made up? Of course, the answer is no, it's not made up, and Daniel's not wrong. So how do we understand this seeming inconsistency? Well, there's not a conclusive way to do it, but there are several plausible solutions that have been brought up by biblical scholars. And the best explanation I've heard revolves around what's called the accession year reckoning that was employed in Babylon. Basically, this means that from the moment that Nebuchadnezzar ascended to the throne until the beginning of the next calendar year would have been called his accession year. Then his first full year would be called his first year, and his second full year would be called his second year. So that would mean Daniel was captured in his accession year, and then he went through training the rest of that year, the whole first year, and most of the second year. So he had his full 3 years of training, but he was still technically in Nebuchadnezzar's second year because of how they dated things. So now that we've dealt with that issue, let's move on to the rest of the text. So in that second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams that greatly troubled him. In Babylon, and really in the ancient world as a whole, dreams were considered a significant way to gain insight into the future. And the Babylonian religion encouraged seeking knowledge of the future through dreams. Dreams were a big part of the religion of Babylon. In fact, biblical scholar Tremper Logman writes that it's in these dreams and then Daniel's interpretation of them that Babylonian religion and Daniel's faith come closest. And he says, perhaps that's why God chose to speak to Nebuchadnezzar in this way. After all, God had spoken through dreams in the past, but not through other means of divination so popular in Babylonia. So dreams were important to Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, and so that's why God used dreams. And we'll see it happens more than once in the book of Daniel. It makes sense that Nebuchadnezzar would give great weight to the dream, and he would want to understand its meaning. So what does he do? Well, in verses 2 to 3, we're told he summons all of the magicians and enchanters and sorcerers and astrologers. He has them come to him and says, tell me what this dream means. These are men who have been trained in the literature, the culture, the history, the mythology, the traditions of Babylon. And they had all of this training so they could be advisors to the king in matters ranging from the political to the religious. So Nebuchadnezzar asked these wise men to tell him about his dream. And in verse 4, they respond with standard court etiquette. May the king live forever. That's just what you said to kings back then so you wouldn't get killed. Then the astrologers tell the king that if he recounts his dream for them, they will be glad to interpret it for him. Likely because the astrologers are the ones who had the knowledge. Interpreting dreams was their area of expertise. So they step up from all the wise men and say, hey, tell us, and we'll interpret it. Pretty standard stuff so far. But in verses 5 to 6, Nebuchadnezzar throws him a curveball and says, you need to tell me what my dream was. I'm not going to tell you my dream. You tell me my dream, and then tell me what it means. And he says if they don't, he will kill them and destroy their property. But if they do, he will bless them with gifts and rewards and honor. That's, of course, an impossible demand, right? No one has the ability on their own to tell someone what they dreamed. So the astrologers are dumbfounded by this request. And in verse 7, they repeat their request to the king, tell us your dream, and then we'll be happy to interpret it for you. But again, the king refuses in verses 8 to 9, stating that he believes them to be stalling because they know that he's resolute in what he's decided, and they don't want to be destroyed. So he gives the reason then why he wants them to recount the dream. He wants them to tell him his dream so he can be assured that they're true and accurate in their interpretation, and they're not simply trying to manipulate him and the situation. Right? Nebuchadnezzar wanted to make certain that his wise men were on the up and up, and they weren't trying to take advantage of his dream or his troubled spirit. So I'll know you're being true and accurate if you tell me what my dream is. So in verses 10 to 11, the astrologers expressed their bewilderment as a request. And they told him that what he was asking was impossible. They said that no king in history had ever made such an impossible request because only the gods could reveal the king's dream to him, and they don't live among the humans. They're basically accusing Nebuchadnezzar of being both unrealistic and unfair. So to hear these accusations and to see the inability of his wise men to fulfill his request, we read in verses 12 to 13 that Nebuchadnezzar becomes furious. And he follows through on his threat by issuing a decree that all the wise men in Babylon be executed. Now that may seem harsh, right? You couldn't do what I said, so I'm just going to kill all of you. But there are explanations for why he would issue such a harsh decree. Number one, perhaps he didn't appreciate being accused of being unrealistic and unfair. And his anger at those accusations caused him to lash out and issue this decree. That's one possible explanation. The second one, and perhaps the more likely explanation, is that the job of the wise men was to be in touch with the gods. The job of the wise men was to communicate with the spiritual realm and discern things that others could not. So by saying that only the gods could tell Nebuchadnezzar his dream, these wise men were basically admitting that they were frauds. And they couldn't do the things they claimed. They were supposed to be able to communicate with the gods. Now they're saying, we can't do that. Only the gods can do that. So for Nebuchadnezzar, you're frauds. You've been lying to me. You can't do what you claim. You should be put to death. And we read in verse 13 that Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were included in those who were ordered to be executed, even though they clearly weren't there during this whole exchange. They were wise men. They're going to be executed as well. In verses 14 to 16, then we see the commander of Nebuchadnezzar's guard, Arioch, goes out to round up all of the wise men in order to execute them. When he arrives to get Daniel and his buddies, Daniel boldly speaks to him in the same way he spoke to the guard about the food in chapter 1. But this time the point is also made that he speaks with wisdom and tact. Daniel understands the seriousness of the situation. And so he speaks wisely, with great thoughtfulness, great sensitivity. Right? Daniel wasn't present when Nebuchadnezzar ordered the wise men to tell him his dream. So he didn't understand why the king would issue such a harsh decree. And so he inquires with Arioch about why this would happen. And Arioch tells Daniel what's going on. So that Daniel, likely through Arioch as an intermediary, boldly approaches the king to ask for time to interpret the dream. But that brings up an interesting question. Why did Nebuchadnezzar give Daniel time when he accused the other wise men of stalling? He said, you guys are stalling. Tell me my dream. But then Daniel says, give me time. And he says, okay, I'll give you time. Why? The difference. Well, the only legitimate answer is that because God caused Nebuchadnezzar to look favorably on Daniel and to trust him. So in verses 17 to 19, Daniel returned home. and immediately explained what was going on to Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, and asked them to urgently pray with him for God's mercy to reveal the mystery of the dream so they might live. Daniel and his buddies know the only hope they have lies in God and in his power, his authority, his control. So they plead with him to intercede on their behalf. And we read that God heard and answered their prayers as he comes to Daniel that night and reveals the mystery of the dream in a vision, which we'll see next week. Daniel and his buddies trusted in God, and they displayed that trust in fervent prayer, and God answered and rewarded that trust. Finally, in verses 20 to 23, we see the hymn of praise that Daniel offers to God for answering their prayers and revealing the mystery. The theme of this particular hymn of praise focuses on the fact that God is indeed God. He has power, he has authority, he has control of all things, seen and unseen in the universe. Commentator Andrew Hill says this of this hymn of praise, quote, "The specific attributes of God's character extolled include his wisdom and power, sovereignty, grace, and compassion, evidenced in his willingness to share this knowledge with his servants, and mercy in hearing and responding to their prayers." End quote. So Daniel is praising God for being a God of mercy and compassion and knowledge. So now that we understand the story, let's turn our attention to what we can take away from it to help our lives, our walks with the Lord today. What it has to teach us about how we make sure we have deeply rooted knowledge of the things of God. And as I already said, first I think we make sure we have knowledge of the things of God by understanding just how present and active he truly is in the world. God was at work in this situation, right? We've already said it. He's the one who gave Nebuchadnezzar the dream. He's the one who caused Nebuchadnezzar to demand the wise men do something that categorically they could not. He's the one who caused Nebuchadnezzar to look favorably on Daniel, and he's the one who revealed the mystery of the dream to Daniel. God was all over this circumstance. He was at work, he was present, he was active. Daniel and his buddies understood that, while Nebuchadnezzar and his cronies didn't. So if we truly want to understand the things of God, we need to understand how present and active he is in our lives and in the world. It brought to mind, to me, a recent experience from our family, moving from California to North Carolina. Right? When you move, there's a lot of different responsibilities attached to it. Especially when you're moving not just down the road, but across the country. There's so many things that have to be done in order for a successful move to occur. And Carla and I experienced all of it just a little over a year ago. There is, of course, all of the packing that needs to be done. There's things that need to be gotten rid of. There's utilities to get shut off at our old house and new ones to turn on at our new house. Our kids need to be withdrawn from their current school and enrolled in their new school. Carla had to quit her job in California and find a new job here. Travel arrangements had to be made to get all the way across the country. Movers had to be scheduled and organized. Small repairs had to be made to our old house. We had to deep clean before we left for good. And we had to unpack and set up our stuff in our new home. That's a lot to take care of. And while Carla and I were handling all of this stuff, the kids weren't having to worry about any of it outside of a little packing and cleaning. For the most part, they were able to go on living their lives as normal, playing and having fun. Why were they able to do that? Because Carla and I were active and in control of the situation. And that's how it is with God. No matter what's going on in your life, no matter what's going on in the world, know beyond a shadow of a doubt that God is present and active, in control of the situation. He's using everything in some way, shape, or form for his plan. I think a lot of Christians, we understand that God takes care of the big things, right? The big things in life, God takes care of. You know, who we marry, when we die, the kids that we have. God takes care of the big things. But we forget that he's involved in the little things too. The mundane things of life, God is still present and active. You turning right instead of left and then learning if you had turned left, you would have been caught in a big car accident. You think that just happened? Or you think God's working in that situation? You know, I remember hearing the story from September 11th, and I don't remember the actor, but there was an actor who was supposed to be getting on one of the planes that flew into the World Trade Center. and he was running late and he missed the plane. And then it crashed into the World Trade Center. Was that just a lucky accident? Or was God working in that situation? See, we forget that God is always working. That every second of every day is part of God's plan. And he's using it in some way, shape, or form for us or for the greater good. And we need to understand that. We need to understand that no matter if we're at the highest of highs and life's going great, God is using that. Or if we're at the lowest of lows and we feel like nothing's ever going to go right ever again, God is using that. And we need to remember that no matter if we're up or we're down, no matter if things are going good or bad, no matter if we're happy or sad, no matter what's going on, we need to remember that God is present and active. Because that helps us understand who he is. Right? He didn't create this world, set it spinning, and then say, good luck. Hope you guys can figure this stuff out. Because he loves us. Because he's our Father. Because he created us to have a relationship with us. And so he's present in our lives, working in our lives, making sure we're going the way we need to be going, doing what we need to be doing. Before he ever created anything, he already had his plan for history laid out. He knew the beginning and the end of the story before he ever created a molecule. And so from that moment, what we read in Genesis 1:1, through to the end, what we read in Revelation, God has been making sure that plan is unfolding exactly the way he wants it to. And there's never a second of your life that he's not in control of. Not that you're some puppet that he's just pulling your strings and making you dance how he wants to, but that he's using everything in your life. He's taking what's happening to you, the decisions you're making, and using them to accomplish his plan. And so we remember how active he is, and that way, one, we can find peace in the darkest times, knowing he's still in control and working. And in the good times, we cannot let ourselves get too high. Like, oh, everything's going great. My life is good. I'm on top of the world. I don't need no help. And we forget to acknowledge God and give him the glory he deserves. So remember that he's always working. He's always active. He's always there with you. And find comfort and hope and peace in that. And turn to him in the good times and the bad times. But then, if we know that God's in control in the good times and the bad times, what do we need to do? We need to allow that knowledge to allow us to live confidently. And allow us to speak the truth of the gospel at all times and in all situations. When we look at the world, when we see the brokenness, when we see the anger and the hatred and the violence, I've said this before up here in the pulpit, it can be overwhelming. You turn on the news and you see warfare in Israel and Gaza. You see disease running through Africa. You see these violent protests going on in Los Angeles, and you can say, this world is lost. We're in trouble. And it can beat you down, and it can defeat you, and it can make you feel like there's no way out. But when you remember that God is still in control, that God is still using all of these things, that allows you to be confident and say, hey, yeah, this world is messed up. Hey, yeah, this world is broken. Hey, we're going through some dark times, but I'm standing on the truth of God, and I'm finding peace in that. And then once you have that confidence within you, you can go out into this broken world and speak the truth of the gospel. Because the bottom line is the only cure for what ails this world is the gospel of Jesus Christ. You can feed a hungry person and you'll satiate them for a couple hours. Or you can feed them and give them Jesus and you've changed their eternal circumstances. And so when we know that God's in control of all things, we can be confident going out into the dark world and telling people about Jesus and showing them the hope, the love, the peace, the mercy, the grace that there is in a relationship with him. Again, I've said this 100 times. We need to meet people's physical needs. The Bible tells us to meet physical needs. Feed the hungry, clothe the naked, heal the sick. But we meet those physical needs as a doorway to then meet the spiritual need, which is much more profound and important. And so we go out into the dark world with the confidence of knowing God's in control and He's working in all things. And we speak the truth in love and share the gospel of Jesus Christ so that people can accept it and be saved. And once you know the gospel, once you have Jesus in here, the stuff that's going on out there starts to seem like not quite as big a deal. Because you know Jesus is still on the throne. You know God is still in control. And you know that the brokenness of this world is temporary as we await the perfection of God's kingdom for eternity. So remember and have faith in the fact that God is always present and active in the world. Second, we make sure we have deeply rooted knowledge of the things of God by living a life that is bathed in prayer. That's what Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah understood when they were faced with Daniel either completing this seemingly impossible task, or if he couldn't, all of them were going to be executed. What was their first response? What was their first instinct? To go to God in prayer and ask for His mercy and His help. They understood that the only way Daniel could be equipped to know the unknowable, the only way he could truly understand mysteries, was to turn to the revealer of mysteries in prayer. They knew that knowledge of the things of God was only available through God and through prayer, and it was their instinct to go to Him. You know, every person in the world has habits of some sort. Things that we have a tendency to do over and over, and they just become part of our daily lives. Some of these habits are good, some of these habits are bad. For example, one of my bad habits is that I chew on my fingers and my fingernails, so the tips of my fingers are a mess. One of Haley's bad habits is that she's obsessed with screens. Anytime the TV or any other screen is on, she gets sucked into it. She's completely oblivious to everything going on around her. Ella has a bad habit of drinking excessively loud. I don't know how she does it, but she's the noisiest drinker I've ever heard in my entire life. Travis has a bad habit of whining every time he doesn't get his way. And Carla doesn't have any bad habits. Everything she does is wonderful. All kidding aside, though, we all need to strive to make prayer one of our daily habits. We need to pray so frequently, so fervently, that it just becomes an ingrained daily part of our life. God is looking for faithful and fervent prayer from us in our daily lives. So pray we must in all things. Prayer is the most important thing you can do. Why? Well, first of all, it's the most important thing you do because God tells you to do it. And if God tells you to do it, doggone it, you better do it. But two, it's the most important thing you can do in your life. It's because it's the way you commune with God. The way you have a relationship with God. I've said this before. You don't have a relationship with somebody and never talk to them, do you? Your family, your friends, that's not a relationship if you don't communicate with one another. So you can't claim to be a Christian and know God and love God and not communicate with Him. And prayer is the way you do that. You have a conversation with your Father. You connect with your Father. You deepen that relationship. Prayer is also important because it strengthens us. It encourages us. It reminds us that there is something greater than ourselves at work in the world. That we have a Father that we can turn to in the good and the bad. That even if there's nobody else we feel like we can turn to when we're going through it, to talk to or to lean on, we always have our Father no matter what. He's always there. And so it's through prayer we find strength and we find comfort. Prayer is also important because prayer is how God has chosen to work in the world. God works through the prayers of His people. Does God need us to pray to work in the world? No. He's God. He could work in the world however He wanted to. But as God, He has chosen to work through the prayers of His people. God's people pray, and He responds to that prayer by acting. So we see throughout Scripture, we see it in our passage. They prayed, God, reveal this mystery to us. Help us know the unknowable. And God responded to that prayer by doing it. God didn't need them. God could have just came to Daniel and said, here's what it means. The prayer didn't have to happen, but that's how God chooses to work. Come to me, talk to me, ask me for what you want, what you need. And I'll determine what you really need and how I really want to answer. But show me how much you believe in me and how much faith you have in me, God says, by praying, by turning to me, by leaning on me. So we must pray because it's powerful. It is effective. It is what shapes our relationship with God. And that's especially true, obviously, in times of turmoil like the one Daniel and his buddies were in. In these times of turmoil, prayer is the most powerful tool in our spiritual toolbox. When you're going through the ringer, I've had times in my life where I've just been going through the ringer. It just seems like one thing after another thing, bad, and you just can't seem to pick yourself up off the mat. Every time you stand up, you get knocked back down. And you can try to go through that on your own. You can try to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. But boy, that's going to be hard. And it's going to take a toll. And you might never be able to do it. And if you do, it might take you a long time. Or you can turn to God and say, God, this is bigger than me. And I'm not strong enough. And with that, if you do not help me, this is going to defeat me. I need you to carry me through this trial because I can't walk through it on my own. And you can find the strength and the comfort of the Holy Spirit leading you through that situation, carrying you through that situation. When we're going through hard times, prayer is what, one, allows us to get those emotions out. It's a venting, right? I remember there was a time when I was running from God where I was just mad at God. My life had not gone the way that it wanted to go, and I blamed him. God, how could you let this happen to me? And I'd talk to my dad, and my dad would always say, you know what? If you're mad at God, tell him. Let it out. Don't keep it bottled up. He already knows you're mad at him. He can take it. So the prayer helps us vent our emotions, whether we're mad at God or we're just depressed because whatever it is, it helps us get those emotions out so then they're not eating up at us. And then it reminds us that God is there with us to help us as our guide, as our companion, as our friend. So in times of turmoil, prayer is more powerful than anything else. When we're going through bad times, instead of wringing our hands and trying to white knuckle it, get on our knees and turn it over to the one who is infinitely capable in all things. So live a life bathed in prayer. And then finally, the two previous points lead us into our last point. We make sure we have deeply rooted knowledge of the things of God by placing our trust in God, relying on him in all things. Knowing that God is present and active and having a life bathed in prayer should always result in us trusting in and relying on God more and more. Again, that's what we've seen from Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah so far in the book. And we'll continue to see it throughout the book. Their time in Babylon was marked by how deeply they trusted in God while they were living as strangers in a strange land. And it's a lesson we must truly take away from this sermon series from the book of Daniel. God is in control, and we need to trust him. It reminds me of a story from my own life that I've shared many times before, but I don't think that I've shared with you all. If I have, forgive me. This story takes place during a time when Carla and I were struggling to make ends meet when I was in seminary. And we were sitting in church one morning and the offering plate came around. At that time, it seemed like we were trying to stretch a dime into a dollar every month. But we always tried to give the Lord his offering. But this month, things were particularly tight for us. Carla was working as a server while I was in seminary, and she had a goal, a monetary goal she had to meet every week to ensure we could pay the bills. Well, business had been pretty slow at the restaurant for a few weeks, so our money was really tight at this point in time. And in order for her to make her goal for this specific week, with Sunday being the last day of the week, she was going to work that evening and had to make $160 in one shift. Now, where she's at now, $160 is chunk change, but where the restaurant she was at then, that was a heck of a lot of money to need to make in one shift. So that morning, as the offering plate went around, Carla asked me if she thought we should hold off on the offering to make sure we had money for all of our bills. And Luke 6:38 came to my mind, that if we give to the Lord, he will return to us. So we needed to give him what was his. So even though we were scraping by the hair of our chinny chin chins, we gave the Lord his offering. And wouldn't you know, she needed to make $160 in 6 hours worth of work. She made $161. We weren't sure how we were going to make ends meet and pay all of our bills that month, but we trusted that God would take care of us, and he did. That's a real-life example of how God is present and active in our lives, how we should trust in him. There's no other explanation for it. Now, I don't tell you this story to pat myself on the back like, hey, look how much I trusted in God. I tell you to show you the amazing things that can happen if we trust in the Lord. So trust in God. Trust in his wisdom, his authority, his plan, and let that free you from any worry, doubt, or fear. Why do we worry? Why do we doubt? Why are we afraid of what's going on in the world or what the future holds? Why? If God is in control, since God is in control, since he has promised us in his word that all of the world, all of history is in the palm of his plan, and his plan is always in place, and he's always making sure his plan comes to fruition, why does anything cause us to worry or doubt or fear? Shouldn't we look at everything, the good and the bad, and say, hey, God, I don't know how you're working in that, but I know that you are. I'm not going to worry about it. God, I don't know how we're going to make ends meet this month, but I know you're in control, and I know you love me, and I know you're looking out for me. So I'm not going to worry about where that money's going to come from. I'm going to trust that it's going to be there when I need it, because as long as I'm faithful, you promise to be faithful. There's no reason to worry about anything. There's no reason to be afraid of anything. There's no reason to doubt anything, because God is in control. And he cares about you, and he loves you. And he wants nothing but your good. And he promises that even if you're suffering, that suffering will only be for a little while. Because in the realm of eternity, your entire life is only a little while. So there's no reason to doubt or worry or fear, because God is in control and God loves you. And he's working all things for his glory and for your good. So trust in him that he has it under control. And then put that trust into action by relying on him rather than trying to do and accomplish everything on your own in your own strength. Again, I feel like a lot of Americans, we have this idea that we have to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. We see a problem ahead of us, and we've got to figure out how to deal with it. We've got to figure out how to overcome it. We've got to, as I said a minute ago, white knuckle it and hold on and just power through. How silly that is for us to rely on our infinitesimal strength rather than the almighty eternal strength of our God. To try to get through life in our own power rather than admitting, I ain't got no power. So God, you help me through. I turn my life over to you. You lead me. You guide me. You hold me up. Because you are God and you are good and you love me. And you are infinitely more capable than I am to get through this trial or that trial or this difficulty. And so, God, I'm not only going to lean on you when things are good, I'm going to lean on you when things are bad, even more so. I'm going to thank you in the good times. I'm going to thank you in the bad times. I'm going to praise you in the good times. I'm going to praise you in the bad times. I'm going to lean on you in the good times. I'm going to lean on you in the bad times, because you are infinitely capable. And my life is yours, not my own, because you have given it to me. When we read our passage this morning, we see that God gave Nebuchadnezzar a very troubling dream. God led Nebuchadnezzar to give his wise men an impossible task. God led Nebuchadnezzar to show favor to Daniel, and God revealed the mystery of the dream to Daniel. And why did he do all this? He did it to ensure that Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were elevated within the Babylonian government, so that there would be faithful men in positions of authority while God's people were exiled there. This proves beyond any shadow of any doubt that God is present and active in the events of history. that He is in control, and therefore that we must pray to Him and trust in and rely on Him. As we stated a couple weeks ago, we are strangers in a strange land. We are exiles in a world that is not our home. And God, well, He's the sovereign God of exiles. Find hope in that. Find peace in that. And live every day for Him. Hallelujah.